The blow came from behind while I was bent over, tying my shoelace in my daughter's living room. Troy's boot connected with my ribs so hard that I heard the crack before I felt the pain. My body slammed into the glass coffee table, and I crumpled to the floor, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Through blurred vision, I saw Melanie standing by the kitchen doorway, one hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Our gazes locked for what felt like forever. I waited for her to rush over, to scream at her husband, to help me. Instead, she slowly turned her face away toward the wall. That's when I knew something in my daughter had died long before that Sunday afternoon. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The soup container had fallen from my hands during the impact, my wife's famous chicken tortilla recipe spreading across their expensive cream carpet. Troy stood above me, his face flushed red from the bourbon he'd been drinking since noon, eyes glazed with something beyond anger. "Told you to stop showing up unannounced, old man," he slurred, adjusting his belt buckle like nothing had happened. I tried to speak, but each breath sent lightning bolts of agony through my chest. Melanie finally moved, but only to grab paper towels for the spill. She wouldn't look at me as I struggled to my knees, one hand pressed against my side where the pain was building into something terrible. The football game blared from the television, announcers shouting about a touchdown. Troy dropped back onto his recliner, already forgetting I existed. I somehow made it to my car, each step an exercise in controlled agony. The drive home took 20 minutes that felt like hours, my hand gripping the steering wheel while the other stayed pressed against my ribs. Every pothole sent fresh waves of pain through my body. In my bathroom mirror, I lifted my shirt with shaking hands and saw the damage. A dark purple bruise was already blooming across my left side, spreading like spilled ink across my pale skin. When I pressed gently, the pain made my vision swim. I sat on the edge of my bathtub, staring at the tile floor, trying to understand how my only child could watch her father get hurt and do nothing. The phone in my pocket buzzed. I pulled it out and typed with trembling fingers, asking why she just stood there. The message showed as read within seconds, but no response came. I waited an hour, then two, watching those three dots appear and disappear repeatedly. Finally, I gave up and tried to sleep, but every position sent fresh agony through my ribs. Morning came with stiffness and deeper bruising. I made coffee with one hand, the other still pressed protectively against my side. My phone rang around 10, but it wasn't Melanie. "Mr. Dunn, this is Marcus from Ohio Valley Bank," the voice said with professional concern. "We're calling about some unusual activity on your savings account. Large withdrawals over the past month. Were these authorized by you?" My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. The joint account I'd added Melanie to after her wedding. My emergency fund containing $25,000 from my pension savings. "How much is left?" I asked quietly. "Currently, the balance is $473, Marcus said. "The withdrawals started small, but last week there was a transfer of $12,000 to an external account." My kitchen suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. I'd added Melanie's name to help her in emergencies, trusting her completely because she was my daughter, the little girl who used to bring me dandelions and call me her hero. "I need to speak with my daughter," I managed. "I'll call you back." But when I dialed her number, Troy's voice answered instead. "Yeah," he said, that same arrogant tone from yesterday. I asked why $24,000 had been taken from my account. His laugh came through the speaker like broken glass. "We figured you didn't need that money just sitting there, Harold. You're not getting any younger. Consider it an early inheritance." "That's theft," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "I'm going to the police." Another laugh, this one meaner. "No, you won't, old man. You need Melanie too much. Who else you got? No wife, no other kids, no friends who still remember your name. You'll shut up and take it because you're too scared of being alone." The line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, his words circling in my head like vultures. He was right about one thing. After my wife died 3 years ago, Melanie became my only family, my only connection to the life we'd built together. But he was wrong about the rest. I set the phone down carefully and looked at the bruise spreading under my shirt. That night, the pain in my ribs grew worse, sharp and constant. I couldn't lie down without gasping. The clinic was quiet on Tuesday morning. The doctor, a young woman named Patterson, gently pressed along my ribcage while I tried not to flinch. 2 fractured ribs, she said, pulling back with concern in her eyes. How did this happen, Mr. Dunn? I told her the truth, every detail from the kick to Melanie turning away. Her expression shifted from professional to something deeper, sadder. She stepped out and returned with a pamphlet titled, Recognizing Elder Abuse. You don't have to live like this, she said quietly, placing it in my hand. There are resources, people who can help. I folded the pamphlet and tucked it into my coat pocket, not ready to admit what it meant. But I kept it. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a message from Melanie that made my chest tighten with something other than pain. Dad, can you come for dinner Friday? I'm making your favorite. The message was so normal, so cheerful, like nothing had happened. Like her husband hadn't stolen my savings and broken my ribs. Like she hadn't watched and turned away. I stared at those words for a long time before responding yes. Friday came with cold rain and darker bruises. Their house looked warm and inviting from the outside, lights glowing in every window. Melanie answered the door wearing her mother's old apron, the blue one with yellow flowers. Hi, Dad, she said with a stiff smile that didn't reach her eyes. The dining room table was set perfectly, and the smell of roast chicken filled the air. Troy sat at the head of the table, smirking at me like we shared a secret. When I brought up the withdrawals, Melanie cut me off firmly. Dad, don't start, she said, her voice carrying a warning edge I'd never heard before. We're having a nice dinner. Troy reached across the table and put his hand over hers, possessive and deliberate. Yeah, Harold, let's keep things pleasant. I fell silent, cutting my chicken into small pieces, my ribs aching with each movement. That's when I noticed it. As Melanie reached for the water pitcher, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a dark purple bruise around her wrist, finger-shaped marks that told a story I'd been too blind to see. She saw me staring and quickly pulled her sleeve down, her cheeks flushing red. The rest of dinner passed in terrible silence. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about that bruise, about the fear in her eyes when she covered it. Maybe Troy wasn't just cruel to me. Maybe Melanie stayed silent because she was scared too, trapped in something she couldn't escape. The realization made me feel sick. I'd been so focused on my own pain and stolen money that I hadn't seen my daughter was suffering too. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I ordered a small recording device online, the kind that looked like a regular pen but captured audio and video. It arrived 3 days later in discreet packaging. I practiced using it in my living room, clipping it to my shirt pocket, testing angles and sound quality. The technology was surprisingly good for something so small. When I visited them next, I wore my old brown jacket with the recording pin carefully positioned. I made small talk about the weather and asked about Melanie's work at the dentist's office. Troy was watching baseball, drinking beer from a bottle, his mood already turning sour as his team fell behind. I mentioned the broken fence in my backyard, asking if he had time to help this weekend. Do I look like your handyman? He snapped, not taking his eyes off the screen. Melanie brought coffee from the kitchen, her movements careful and practiced like she was walking through a minefield. Troy, Dad just asked a question, she said softly. That's when he exploded. He threw the coffee cup at me, and it shattered against the wall beside my head, hot liquid spraying across my face and jacket. Get out of my house, old man, he roared, standing up so fast his recliner tipped backward. I didn't flinch, didn't react, because my recording pen was capturing everything. I simply stood, thanked Melanie for the coffee, and walked out with evidence tucked in my pocket. But I needed more than property destruction. I needed his confession about the money, about his threats, something undeniable that would hold up if I ever had to use it. So, I waited 3 days, then called Troy directly with a plan that made my hands shake. I wanted to apologize for Friday, I said, keeping my voice humble and defeated. You're right. I've been intrusive. Silence on the other end, then suspicion. What do you want, Harold? I took a breath. I'm cashing out an old insurance policy, about $15,000. I thought maybe I could help you and Melanie out. You know, officially this time. His tone changed immediately, greed replacing irritation. That's real decent of you. Why don't you come by tonight? We can work out the details. I smiled at my phone, already setting up another recording device. He brought a contract. When I arrived that evening, Troy had papers spread across their dining table. Loan agreement, he said, sliding documents toward me with a pen. But as I read slowly, Pretending to struggle with the small print, I saw it wasn't a loan at all. The document was a transfer of funds, a complete surrender of my insurance payout to him with no repayment terms. "This says transfer, not loan," I said carefully. His jaw tightened. "Don't get technical, old man. Sign it." I hesitated, and his hand slammed down on the table, making me jump. "You'll regret it if you cross me," he hissed, leaning close enough that I could smell the bourbon on his breath. "I know where you live. I know you're alone. Accidents happen to stubborn old fools who don't know when to cooperate." My hidden recorder caught every word, every threat. I signed the paper with a pen that wasn't really a pen. The next morning, I drove to the office of Edna Walsh, a retired lawyer who'd been my wife's friend for 30 years. She listened to the recordings, her face growing darker with each second. When Troy's threat played, she paused the recording and looked at me with fury. "This is coercion, Harold. Financial exploitation, assault, and now extortion. We have enough to destroy him legally." She leaned back in her leather chair, fingers drumming on the desk. "But we need him to incriminate himself one more time, somewhere we control completely. On your property, with witnesses." I asked her to help me plan something clean, something that would put him away for good. Edna smiled grimly. "Melanie's birthday is next month. How about you host a small dinner party?" The trap was beginning to take shape, pieces moving into position on a chessboard Troy didn't know he was playing on. I called Melanie the following week, my voice warm and fatherly. "Sweetheart, I want to host your birthday dinner at my house this year. Nothing fancy, just you, Troy, and me. Like old times." She sounded surprised, but pleased. "Really, Dad? That would be nice." I knew Troy would agree because he saw me as a defeated old man with money he could still squeeze out. I bought Melanie's favorite cake from the bakery she loved as a child, chocolate with raspberry filling. I set the dining table with my wife's good china, the plates we'd saved for special occasions. And I hid a small camera in the flower vase centerpiece, its lens barely visible among the white roses. Edna's nephew, a young man named Kyle who worked in private security, would be waiting in his car outside wearing a wire connected to recording equipment. Everything was ready. I just needed Troy to be himself. The night arrived with clear skies and comfortable warmth. Melanie showed up first, looking beautiful in a yellow dress, carrying a bottle of wine. Troy followed in his truck, already half drunk based on how he walked. They settled into my living room while I finished dinner preparations. Troy was in a good mood, joking loudly, drinking the beer he'd brought. Halfway through the meal, I mentioned needing a new roof and wondering about contractors. "You got money for that?" Troy asked immediately, always circling back to finances. I shrugged. "Some savings left. I'm careful with my pension." He laughed, that cruel sound I'd grown to hate. "Yeah, you better be careful. Old guys like you, anything could happen. Falls, accidents, who knows?" Melanie looked down at her plate, her hands trembling slightly as she cut her chicken. Troy kept going, emboldened by alcohol and arrogance. "I told you your dad would hand it over," he said, laughing at Melanie like I wasn't there. "Old fool can't help himself. Thinks buying our love will make up for being a boring old man." She didn't respond, just kept eating with her eyes down. Then Troy said the words that sealed everything. "Besides, if he talks to cops or makes trouble, I'll put him in the ground. Simple as that." Who'd miss him? The camera in the vase caught it all, every word, every gesture, his face clear and confident in the candlelight. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep eating like I hadn't heard the death threat. Inside, I was cataloging every second, knowing this recording would destroy him. After they left, I retrieved the camera and sent the footage to Edna immediately. The next morning, I drove to Melanie's house while Troy was at work and handed her a small flash drive. "Watch this when he's not home," I said, pressing it into her hand. She looked confused, turning the tiny drive over. "What is it?" I couldn't tell her yet, not fully. "Just watch it, sweetheart. Then call me." She nodded slowly, and I left before she could ask more questions. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message that made my heart clench. "Dad, I didn't know he said those things. I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was this bad." I started typing a response, but another message came through that changed everything. He found the drive. Then, seconds later, he's furious. "I'm leaving the house now. I'm coming to you." I watched through my front window as her headlights appeared in my driveway 10 minutes later. But behind her car came another vehicle, Troy's black truck pulling in fast, tires screeching on the pavement. He got out holding a tire iron, his face twisted with rage. He kicked my front door so hard the frame cracked, the lock breaking under the force. "You think you're smart, old man?" he roared, storming into my living room with the tire iron raised. Melanie rushed in behind him, screaming for him to stop. I stood up from my chair, my ribs still aching, but my spine straight. "You're already recorded, Troy," I said calmly, pointing to the small camera I'd installed above my bookshelf after the last visit. "Everything you've done tonight, breaking in, the weapon, all of it. It's over." He froze, eyes darting around looking for cameras. That's when the red and blue lights flashed through my windows, police cruisers pulling into my driveway with sirens wailing. Edna's nephew, Kyle, had been monitoring everything from his car and called for backup the moment Troy arrived. Officers poured through my broken door, ordering Troy to drop the weapon and get on the ground. He tried to run, but they tackled him in my hallway, handcuffs clicking around his wrists while he shouted threats and curses. Melanie stood against the wall, sobbing into her hands, her body shaking. I handed the lead officer all my recordings, the flash drive, the contracts, everything I'd carefully collected. "You planned this whole thing?" Officer Martinez asked, looking at me with something like respect. "Every step," I confirmed. They took Troy away in the back of a cruiser, his face pressed against the window, eyes burning with hate. Melanie collapsed into my arms, crying harder than she had since her mother's funeral. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." I turned away. I held her while she broke apart, feeling pieces of our relationship starting to shift back into place. But revenge wasn't done yet. The legal system still had its turn. The trial happened 6 weeks later in county court. Troy's public defender tried to paint me as a vindictive old man with a grudge, someone who'd manufactured evidence to destroy his daughter's marriage. But when the prosecutor played the video of Troy kicking my ribs, the courtroom went completely silent. You could hear people's breathing, the soft crying from someone in the back row. Melanie sat in the gallery, tears streaming down her face as she watched her husband's violence displayed for everyone to see. Then came the audio recordings of his threats, his confession about stealing my money, his promise to put me in the ground if I talked. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts including assault, financial exploitation of an elderly person, extortion, and criminal threatening. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in state prison with no chance of early parole. I sat in the courtroom, watching Troy's face crumble as they led him away in chains. I didn't smile, didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I just felt tired and old, my ribs still aching on cold mornings, a permanent reminder of that Sunday afternoon. But I had one more document to file, one final piece of my plan that I'd kept private. Before everything happened, Melanie had been my sole heir, inheriting everything when I died. My house, my pension, my life insurance, everything was hers without question. But now I sat in Edna's office, rewriting my will with careful, deliberate changes. "I'm not cutting her off completely," I explained. "But I need to know she's safe first, that she won't fall back into old patterns." Edna nodded approvingly as I dictated the terms. A trust fund that would only activate under specific conditions. Melanie would receive her inheritance only if she remained separated from abusive relationships for 3 consecutive years, maintained steady employment, and attended counseling sessions documented by a licensed therapist. The trust would pay for her therapy, her housing, her necessities, but she couldn't access the principal until she proved she'd rebuilt her life on stable ground. "You're not punishing her," Edna said, reviewing the documents. "You're protecting her from herself." I signed the new will with a heavy heart, knowing Melanie would see this as control, as manipulation, as one more way her father refused to trust her. But I did it anyway because sometimes love means setting boundaries that hurt. When I told her 3 days later, sitting in my living room with the new will on the coffee table between us, her face went through shock, hurt, and finally rage. She came storming to my house the next morning, her face red with anger. "You're controlling me even from beyond the grave," she shouted, standing on my porch with her hands clenched into fists. "I'm trying to make sure you never live in fear again," I said quietly, staying in my doorway, keeping my voice calm. "I watched you turn away when he hurt me. I watched you make excuses for him, defend him, enable him. I won't leave you money that might attract another Troy into your life." She turned to leave, her whole body shaking with fury. At the steps, she paused and whispered without looking back, "I don't need your money." Then she walked to her car and drove away, leaving me standing in the doorway wondering if I'd lost her forever. 6 months passed with no contact. I thought about calling every day but stopped myself, giving her space to figure out who she was without Troy, without me, without anyone telling her what to do. Then one morning, my doorbell rang. Melanie stood on my porch holding a folded piece of paper, her expression softer than I'd seen in years. She handed me the letter without speaking. I unfolded it carefully, my old hands shaking slightly as I read her neat handwriting. She'd filed for divorce, the papers already processed. She joined a support group for domestic violence survivors, attending meetings twice a week. She'd found work at the public library, a job she genuinely enjoyed, helping people find books and managing the children's reading program. "You were right, Dad," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. I kept turning away because I thought love meant endurance. I thought being strong meant accepting pain. Mom would be ashamed of who I became. I pulled her into my arms, holding her like I used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "Your mother would be proud of who you're becoming," I said into her hair. "I have something to show you," I said, leading her down to my basement. I'd spent the last 6 months building something in secret, a project that kept me going through lonely nights and painful mornings. I opened the door to reveal a small room I'd constructed and decorated carefully. The walls were covered with photos of Melanie's childhood, her mother, family vacations, birthday parties, school achievements. I'd framed her elementary school report cards, her mother's favorite recipes written in faded ink, even the dandelions Melanie used to pick for me, now pressed and preserved behind glass. "I wanted to remind you who you were before fear," I said, watching her face as she moved slowly through the memories. She stopped in front of a photo of her mother holding baby Melanie, both of them laughing in summer sunlight. "I thought I'd lost you," she murmured, touching the frame gently. "You found me instead." The next day, she surprised me by showing up with someone I'd never met. A little boy, maybe 4 years old, with Melanie's eyes and dark curly hair. "Dad, meet your grandson," she said softly, her hand on the boy's shoulder. "His name is William, after Mom's father." I hadn't known she was pregnant during all the chaos with Troy. She'd hidden it, scared and unsure, dealing with everything alone. William ran into my arms without hesitation, and I held him while something broken inside me started to heal. We spent the afternoon in my backyard, William chasing butterflies while Melanie and I sat on the porch swing her mother had loved. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace settling over my tired bones. That evening, there was one more knock at my door. Detective Martinez stood there holding a manila folder, his expression serious but satisfied. "Mr. Dunn, I wanted to update you personally," he said, stepping inside when I gestured. "Troy's case helped us crack open 3 other investigations involving financial exploitation of elderly victims. He'd been running the same scam with other families, targeting isolated seniors through their relatives. The folder contained police reports, bank records, testimonies from other victims who'd been too scared or ashamed to come forward until my case made the news. An 82-year-old widow who'd lost her entire retirement. A 75-year-old veteran whose grandson had stolen his disability payments. Stories that made my chest ache with shared pain and anger. Your willingness to fight back, to document everything. It gave other people courage," Martinez continued. "We've recovered some of the stolen funds and arrested 2 accomplices. None of this would have happened if you'd stayed silent." After he left, I stood in my living room holding that folder, realizing my pain had served a purpose beyond personal justice. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a final letter to Melanie, sealing it in an envelope marked, "To be opened when you receive your inheritance." Inside, I wrote things I needed her to know, lessons learned through suffering that I hoped she'd never forget. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting," I wrote. "It's remembering with wisdom. It's knowing what happened, understanding why, and choosing to move forward without letting bitterness poison your future. You'll carry scars from Troy, just like I carry mine from that Sunday afternoon. Those scars don't make you broken. They make you someone who survived." I placed the letter in the trust file at Edna's office, to be delivered when Melanie met all the conditions of the new will. My ribs had healed months ago, the fractures mending slowly but completely. But I still had the scar beneath my shirt from where I hit the coffee table, a thin white line that reminded me every morning that silence is how cruelty survives. As I watched Melanie and William laugh in my garden, playing in the flowers her mother had planted a decade ago, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The kick that broke more than ribs. The stolen money that revealed deeper theft. The recordings that became weapons. The trial that brought justice. The will that set boundaries. The room full of memories that showed my daughter who she used to be. Maybe this was the revenge all along. Not destroying Troy, but saving Melanie from becoming someone who turned away from suffering. Not punishing her, but protecting her until she was strong enough to protect herself. William ran over with a dandelion, just like his mother used to do, and placed it carefully in my hand. "For you, Grandpa," he said with a gap-toothed smile. I held that yellow flower like it was made of gold, feeling the weight of generations in my palm. The story ends here, but peace continues, growing like flowers in careful hands.